Welcome back for another episode of Inspired Content. We'll be looking at another storytelling game. This time we're looking at Once Upon a Time. I'll take a look at that and see what ideas it inspires, and then I'll see you back here on the other side. Alright, so this is Once Upon a Time. It's a card game. You basically have three types of cards you're going to play with. The first one is everybody draws one of these, which is the ending they're trying to reach. For me, this is the king fulfilled his side of the bargain and everyone was happy. For my opponent, it would be so they returned what was stolen to its original owner. We're each trying to get the story to end on our card here. The rest of the cards are story cards, or story interrupt cards, which we'll get to in a second. But story cards include character cards, and you'll see that they've got this marker in the top. Or object cards, or thing cards, which are with that symbol on the top. Or event cards with that in the top. Places with the castle on the top. Aspect, which would be like adjective cards with the sun in the top. There are these interrupt cards, which can be used as story cards, so you could play the parting ways, ruins, far away, returned as regular story elements, but they're also something that in the course of play, if somebody's talking about something and they lay down in this case, an aspect card, say somebody is cursed, they lay that card down, I can then use this from my hand and interrupt and take over. But there's also another way to interrupt, which is simply to let somebody tell the story, and if they say something to the effect of the character was cursed with a spell of wolf form, they're cursed into a werewolf, and I have wolf card, that means I can interrupt and take over the course of the story. And the thing that happens with an interrupt is every time somebody interrupts a player, the player who was interrupted draws a card from the deck. If the person is telling their story and they can't use any more of their cards, can't figure out how to continue the story with the cards that are in their hand, and can't use their finishing card to end, and it's the only thing left in their hand, then they can pass. They can pass the story on to somebody else. When they pass, they draw a card, and then they can discard a card from their hand. If a player interrupts unsuccessfully, say they try to use a cave of the deadly Doberman Pinscher, and somebody tries to play the wolf card and nobody's going to let that one fly because a wolf and that type of dog are not the same thing, then they have unsuccessfully interrupted, and so they have to discard their card that they tried to interrupt with and draw 2 new cards. And if the storyteller's ending doesn't match with the rest of the story, then it fails and they have to draw a new ending card after discarding their ending. And draw one new story card. So that's the very basics of how this game works. And the instructions here go into a bit more detail on some of it. But that's the very basics. Alright. Okay, Once Upon a Time. I'm going to rate this a 7.1 out of an 8.3. I would say this is definitely a great game for telling stories and working with friends and family towards storytelling as a group. But let's move into some of the ideas of how we can take a game like this and do something maybe a little different with it. There's a Dominoes game that I used to play with family called Mexican Train. And the way that's done is a central domino is put down and you start with something that goes with, matches that domino. And then each turn you have the option of matching that next one, and if you play a double, you're able to do more than one turn. If you put down a double and you can't satisfy it, everybody else has to satisfy that match before anybody can go any further. So the idea to do it with this would be something like you place a setting card or a character card in the center, and you then have to tell your story with your cards after that. But you only draw a certain number of cards. You do one per turn, unless maybe you'd use something like an interrupt card in this case, where you have to satisfy that interrupt, or everybody else has to afterwards. And then, but each turn you try to get further into your story and use up all your cards to tell your story until you can get to your ending. I can see these being used sort of in the same way that tarot cards are being used, but in this case, using them to sort of tell the story of a real person. Sort of like a biography of a person, you, your family member, or something like that. But do it in sort of like the legend of such and such. If you've ever seen the movie Big Fish, where a lot of the stories are told as sort of fairy tale legends, using something like this to tell somebody else's story, but do it in like a tarot card, so fictionalized stories about the hero, your uncle, or something. Okay, I can see using these to do a kind of a group shared story setting where the universe is laid out with the events that are happening, the characters involved. You just lay out a series that's the base universe, and then each player plays a series of their own little side stories happening in that universe. And so you have to pay attention to other characters' stories and other players while building your story so that you can play off of each other. but you're doing your own string and you're trying to run out of cards. And you have to come up, I'll have to come up with a mechanic where maybe either a cooperative end is reached or a competitive element where somebody has to finish their story first or use enough of a series of cards. I can see a cooperative game where everybody's trying to cooperate towards getting towards a single ending card. Where instead of everybody getting their own card, the group has a single goal card they're all trying to reach. And they have to draw cards and use cards and discard cards in a method that gets them closer to achieving that end for the group. I'd like to find a solitary way of playing this game. You know, when you play some of the solitaire games, you turn over 3 cards and you have the 4 suits that you're trying to get things into, and you try to pick the top off of the 3 cards and find a location in it in the suits to make them match up so that you can take stacks and make whole sections of that story. There's got to be a way to do that with these, so somebody can sit down and make fairy tales that work and are interesting by playing solitary. This one's a little quirky and it would take some real tinkering, but I think I'm going to try to do it at some point. I want to do something similar to this, where you build a line of a storyline, but I want them to be time travel stories, where the storyline is already advancing itself, and the players, as they take turns, have the opportunity occasionally come up where they have the means to travel back along the storyline and set it off in a new direction and change things. Alright. That's the end of this episode, and I will see you on Monday, where we'll be going back to once a week. I will finish this month off as National Novel Writing Month with another product and service, but also some updates about some of the things that have been done during the course of this month. Alright, see you on Monday. Big old clusterfuck. Absolutely.